Thanks. हम लोग देख रहे थे कि about the customer profile. But there is another type of communication which we have seen, which is with the intermediaries. Okay, what are the intermediaries? Intermediaries are like the distribution agencies or the external sales people, the strategic sales partners that are included into it. Okay, a lot of companies have this kind of a supply chain model of business where they are doing their business through distribution of their goods. Correct. So there are retailers, and there are distributors, there are stockists and other things. So we have to have a good communication along with them as well, and we have to satisfy their self interests. Otherwise, they can actually simply migrate to our competitors also. And then we have to know the logistics and culture to understand the cultural makeup of the group of people who we are going to talk to. Now, this becomes very much relevant when we are also going for, either we are addressing a larger landscape like India is, where we have a lot of diversity of people, a lot of diversity of language and culture and so on. And this is also predominantly applicable when we are having some overseas communication with the people who are outside our country. We have to understand their culture, their slang, the way they want to, the taboos which we shouldn't be touching, their comfort zones and so on. So we have to understand that particular cultural makeup of the people, of the targeted audience, so that we can do an effective communication. Anyone who would like to add anything into this, because these are the 9 broad areas which we have added. Any other areas which you would like to highlight in the marketing originated communication, marketing oriented communication? No one? Okay. So now let's go to the next part of it. So there is something which is called as a supplier communication. So supplier communication is basically there are 2 things which are predominantly involved into the supplier communication. One is a technical part of it, and other is a commercial aspect of it. If you are into a specific technology cell, either through a software or a hardware or anything like that, if you are selling goods or your services through any supplier, then there are a lot of technical things which you need to educate your supplier about. That is when they will be able to further convey the message to the direct clients. So a lot of technical communication is involved into it, and a commercial communication is involved into it, because at the end of the day you have to also take into account their personal interest, because they are the intermediaries. So what is their share into it? What is the delivery cost? What is the company's profit? What are the taxes? Who will be bearing the taxes? Who will be bearing the the kind of logistical insurance, if there is any, or who's bearing the logistical cost and everything? That is all included into this. Many times there are follow-ups about the sales process, whether this particular amount is sold or not, and then there are complaints about the delivery or price or anything like that. So there are the complaint resolution kind of thing. Now, in the book, it is written that media selection is not a serious problem when we are doing the supplier-oriented communication. So we will stick to that if it is coming into MCQ kind of a thing. We will stick to it that the media selection is not a serious problem. But in my personal opinion, media selection can cause a serious problem if a proper media is not selected. Meaning, at any point of time, any supplier queries, maybe commercial or technical, are resolved, largely commercial, if they are resolved through informal channels or verbal channels which do not leave any trails into it or the logs into it, then that can cause a serious business problem, and it can cause a business relation problem as well. Secondly, no persuasive communication is generally required. We will stick to this only because book says that no persuasive communication is required generally with the supplier oriented communication. But whenever there is a commercial orientation that comes into communication, largely a persuasive communication is what that is required, so that we are aligned to the business and we are doing the business happily. Much of this communication can also be standardized, because largely there are follow-ups, complaints, and the technical and commercial knowledge transfer. So once this communication is standardized, basically it will help you reach out to more and more people quickly, like more and more suppliers or more and more vendors quickly. You will be able to convey your messages really quick and in a standardized format. Second part is the reception. So reception is actually the reception of the company. Okay, reception is the first contact point between the visitor and your organization, and that is why it creates the first impression as well. However many times the person might have spoken with you on the phone or in the emails, how they're received in the organization at the reception itself creates a good impression about the company, or the long lasting impression about the company. What does reception include? There are two things. One is the facilities to receive the people. What is your sitting arrangement? Are there washrooms? How clean is it? Is it nicely fragrant and all? What is the lighting into it? So there are a lot of other things which get involved into the facilities when we want to receive the people. And secondly, it should have an ability to communicate within the organization that such and such person has arrived with such and such intention. A lot of companies have actually automated this process. They're selling the softwares just to empower your reception for better reception of the visitors. You can Google them, beautiful softwares. They have appointment management, they have identity verification, uh, they give you, the visitor cards and so on, so that you are given an access into the limited part of the premises. They would walk you to the specific rooms or specific conference halls if that is required, and so on. So the escort facility is there. Another part is the ability to handle exception queries is very limited at the reception, because reception is largely the public face only. It is not the brain. So ability to handle the exceptional queries is very limited at the reception, and that is another reason why exceptionally good internal communication is one of the skill sets which a receptionist should have. Many a times the receptionist itself is again becomes an in charge of the incoming calls. So first you would be dialing the reception, and then your call gets transferred internally through the board line. And many a times they're also handling the email IDs, like the info or the inquiry related things, so that they can pass them on to relevant departments whenever necessary. So good telephone manners and good email handling is also required at reception. Another part which I think is very necessary, or very relevant for information, is about the security of the organization, because it's the first contact with the external party, or even with your employees when they're entering into the organization, and the last point of contact when they're exiting the organization. Reception should be highly cautious about the security, not just the perimeter security of the organization, but also the information security. So no information should get passed on to the wrong parties. So there should not be any slippages in the communication, there should not be any miscommunication, and of course there has to be a continuous alertness for the perimeter security. So in a lot of government offices, you might have seen that the receptionist itself is equipped with a gun, or maybe there are cops around, maybe there are security people around, because that is the first point of contact between the external parties and the organization. So this is where the reception comes in picture. Going to the next part, office or organizational communication. We have seen this already through the internal downward communication, internal upward communication, and the horizontal communication as well, the lateral communication. The only part which we can see here additionally is basically this triangle. So organizational communication can be one-to-one communication, it can be a one-to-many communication, it can be a many-to-many communication, or many-to-one communication, depending on the type of event it is, depending on the type of communication or the need for communication it originates from. The whole administrative communication is guided by a framework of rules and regulations. So what are these rules and regulations? These rules and regulations might be your killer chain. These rules and regulations might be use of certain formats or templates. It can be, having certain preferences for the medium of communication which you are going to handle. Sometimes if you're in a roaming kind of a role in the organization, if you're traveling a lot, then many a times your CEO or your boss would actually take your SMS for a word. But when you're sitting in the office, you're expected to send an email. Or even if you're sending an SMS for the ease of communication at that point of time, you are actually, expected to ratify it, or you're actually expected to support it with an email communication at a later date, with giving the reference to that specific message or something like that. So this is the whole administrative communication part, which has a lot of rules, regulations, which create a framework. And you have to always make sure that you're sticking to that particular framework, so that your message is taken as an authentic message and it is taken as a formal message. At any point of time, it will be your savior. Then there is a communication which is from the meetings. Okay. Yes. Anyone has any queries or anything like that? So then there is a communication through meetings. The meetings is a technique for group activity. That is why we create various meetings into, where group decisions are involved into it. So whenever a group of people wants to come together, discuss certain things, give their inputs into it, and come to a decision, that is where meetings are held. Meetings is a very formal way of communication. Now, details about meetings, we actually have a whole chapter about meetings, how we want to conduct the meetings and how it should be, logistically arranged and so on. So we'll just have an introductory part here. Information needs to be distributed in the meeting. And in the meeting, there are two more things or three more things which with an asterisk, which you can see here. So meetings are very formal. Okay. These are not the casual meetings or informal meetings. These are very formal meetings, including your board meetings, including your committee meetings, including your interdepartmental meetings. It is not town hall. So those who are working in organizations, they already know what is a town hall. Town hall is not a formal meeting. It's an informal meeting. But a board meeting or annual planning meeting is a very formal meeting. Secondly, some of the meetings have a legal aspect to it. Okay. So there are certain provisions in the law which tell you that you have to conduct some of the meetings. Like every company is supposed to conduct an annual general meeting, an AGM. Even your housing societies are supposed to conduct a general body meeting at least once in a year. Okay. So some of the meetings have some legal aspect which is attached to it. When we say legal aspect, there are again the quorum requirements for it, that minimum these many number of people should be present with this much of the the designation, what should be their designation, what should be their authority, what should be the time frame in which they should be present, and so on. And one more aspect which I have added from my point of view is the tech enabled meetings. Now that we are largely working from home, this is a tech enabled meeting which we are currently attending. So tech enablement, the type of technology which you want to choose for conducting that particular meeting, whether you want to record the meeting, who would be recording the meeting, understand this. This is a very formalized structure which Mansi has created. She has taken an initiative, but then Poonam is deputed for creating every meeting, and she is diligently doing that. When she creates a meeting, Mansi is making sure that it is communicated to all the people through all the groups. When the meeting ends, we have to join the same link again, right? So we have a formal setup of the meetings, we have a formal setup of conducting the meetings, we have a formal setup of communicating the meetings, we have a formal setup of recording the meetings and publishing the recordings of it. We also share these presentations after that. So there are responsibilities, roles and responsibilities for the people who are addressing, the people who are getting addressed, and so on. So this is a very formal tech enabled meeting that we are currently undertaking. So in a regular organization, there are weekly meetings or daily scrum meetings, there are quality circle meetings, departmental meetings, project meetings, topical meetings, basically for one specific topic discussion or something. These are all part of your organizational life, so you'll be doing a lot of meetings. People many
Excuse
times.
me, I can't
Yes,
see the screen, please. Screen, share the screen.
my screen is visible already. I'll share it again.
Okay, I can see the names and rest of the things, but what you're telling, it's not visible on the screen.
Is it visible now?
Yes, yes. Thank you.
So I was talking about this particular part. Can you see this now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I was talking about the tech-enabled meetings here. Now going to the next part. These are the four broader categories again. So one is a public relations. Public relations basically creates a publicity. Okay. Now marketing communication is little bit different from the public relations. Okay. How is it different? In marketing, basically you are taking a message and directly conveying it to the receiver that we are selling this thing. In public relations, it actually gives you a cushion. Okay, there is something which is, I'm not sure why this is happening whenever I'm touching my mouse. So sorry about that. So in the public relations, basically the companies do a lot of community work. They would sponsor some of the events. They would be organizing some of the events on their own. They would do some newspaper publicity, exhibitions, their online presence, through various blogs, through various online channels, their own website. They might want to conduct some of the webinars and other things. So through which their public relationships are built. Now this public relation building is again oriented largely toward creating the brand value in the market. So if someone just calls you every time about what they are doing or what they're selling, you would get irritated. But if they send out an email, or maybe if they publish something in the newspaper that they're conducting such and such event, or they're sponsoring such and such event, and their customers will be given a preferential entry into it, or something like that. This is how the public relations are getting maintained. Now I think we have a complete chapter about this also, so we'll discuss about this in that topic. Then comes a part with the industrial relations. Industrial relations are basically the internal relations within your industry or the within your company. Okay. This is a sensitive communication area concerned with the employees and their families. So this is that particular gray area of the communication where the communication can be formal or informal, because here your employees and their families are concerned. This is a sensitive area, so communication in this particular area sometimes also becomes more emotional rather than rational. Lot of informal relations are involved in this particular communication. Okay. I'm sure that most of you who have already worked with some of the organizations, there are bosses, there are your other colleagues who you have formal relation with, but then some of them over the period of time become your friends, and you also have some kind of an informal communication with them. When you are resigning from the organization, before telling your boss, you might want to tell them that you are resigning from your job and so on. So these are the kind of things that are there. So this specific area where a lot of informal relations also come into play, and the families of the employees can also come into play. Largely this communication is kept or maintained so that the employees are kept abreast of the company news, achievements, and intentions. So we have to give them the updates onto it. We have to give them for the employees, we need to tell them the company's intentions. If your company is going to close down, if your company is going to shut down one particular plant, or if your company is going to open a new particular plant. Okay, if you're a cement company, you're going to shut down one of the plants, thousands of people might lose job. But telling them beforehand, or giving them an opportunity to transfer to some other plant for the same employment, or at least giving them a severance package, These are the kind of industrial relationship communications which you might have to go through. This communication needs to be a regular. It cannot be an ad hoc communication. Based on certain events, based on certain specific notifications which you want to convey to them, yes, it can be an ad hoc communication. But industrial relationship maintenance has to be a regular, should be at regular interval. Another aspect of why that should be regular is in the large companies, in uh, companies which have thousands of employees working for them, or for the MNCs and other things. People working in that specific department or specific team would know each other, but they would not know the management, or the management doesn't know them. They are completely oblivious to what the management is intending to do, and management doesn't understand what are their expectations from the employees. So there is a lot of attrition in those organizations. And whenever a specific team member or a key member from that particular team is resigning, there is a lot of effort which is taken by the HR, which is taken by the accounts, which is taken by other departments as well, and that specific team who is suffering that particular attrition. So in order to keep the employees abreast of the organization's achievements, what we have achieved so far and everything, help you retain the employees for a longer period of time. So that is another strategic communication, so that your employee retention is improved by maintaining the industrial relations. Okay, so a lot of companies would use in-house journals, handouts. A lot of companies would send periodic emails. I get a weekly email from my company telling me about what were the achievements which my company made in that particular week, how many clients we brought in, if there were any news where our employees or maybe our directors have featured into Economic Times or some other journals and so on. So that keeps on happening. Then there is an event communication. There are multiple formal and informal events that a company can hold. So like just we saw in the public relations, the events can be sponsored or the events can be organized. Now, one particular event requires a special team, okay, or an ad hoc group who would manage entire communication around that group. Now, in my personal experience, and we have another unit for this also, there is a pre-event communication, there is a during event communication, and then there is a post-event communication. So all these three things need to be managed, and it is best if it is managed by the same team. Of course, it depends on the type of event it is and the type of event it is, on the scale or the type of audience that we are expected to attend this particular event. So through ad hoc groups, we would manage the invitations, we would arrange for the contractual services, we would provide the marketing, we would provide the post-event communication, and so on. Event communication can be partially or fully outsourced. Okay, so this is about the event communication. And then communication with the service providers. These are your service providers. These are not your vendors. These are not your suppliers. Your vendors and suppliers are going to provide you goods, not the services. Okay, so this is with the service providers. Service providers are like your banks, your auditors, your consultants, your advisors, and other people who are actually providing some service to you. Now, what happens here is once the initial services are contracted, the rest of the communication becomes a routine. So we have 10 minutes. I am intending to finish this particular topic in next 10 minutes only. Remaining communication becomes kind of a routine. Whenever a communication becomes routine, it can be standardized, it can be templatized. So again, vendor communication also sometimes can be standardized. That is where a lot of ticketing facility also comes in picture. Okay, so whenever we are raising the ticket, it is actually the way we are communicating with our service provider. It can be in form of reports, it can be in part of feedback compliance, and so on. So these can be periodic reports, and this is a very formal communication again. Now going to the next part of it, there is a stakeholder communication. Shareholders are a class of stakeholders. Stakeholders can be multiple. Stakeholders can be anyone who's holding stake in your organization. They can be KMPs, they can be your private equity investors, they can be your angel investors and other things. So stakeholder communication is very important. Specifically, it will help the organization build the capital around it. Unless the shareholder communication is not effective, they will not be interested in investing your company. They will not be interested in increasing the investment in your organization. And unless they invest, basically a large part of capital cannot be built up for that specific project or for that specific intention for which you want to have that capital. Okay. You might have seen that recently during the lockdown, a lot of IPOs are coming in. Like wave after wave, IPOs are coming in. Many of them are successful, some of them are unsuccessful. And largely that is because of how they have propagated their IPO throughout the market, not just for the retail investors, but for the industrial investors actually, for the not the industrial, foreign and domestic institutional investors. So unless you have those kind of communication with the stakeholders, basically you cannot convey the value which you are creating for them so that they can invest in your organization. So to keep shareholders updated on the company's current state in terms of performance. Stakeholder communication also has a legal aspect to it. If you're a publicly listed company, or even if you're a public company which is not listed, which is not trading the shares onto the stock exchanges, or even you are a privately held company who has raised some capital through the private equity or some sleeping partners or other things, there are legal aspects to it through which you have to communicate some part of your company's performance to your stakeholders, annual report being one of the parts. Then there is a statistical data and information that is shared in the audit. So publishing the audit reports, statutory meetings, presenting the statutory reports at the time of your board and committee meetings, and at the time of your general meetings as well, disclosure to various stock exchanges which are sent whenever the directors are changing and so on. All of this becomes a part of stakeholder communication. I'll tell you a very interesting example. All of you use Colgate, right? This happened with Unilever, I guess, Hindustan Unilever. Through some of their subsidiaries, they had some the amount of stock, the percentage of the stock holding between the directors was changed. Now, as per the listing regulations, SEBI LODR and other things, they were supposed to disclose that to the stock exchanges and the SEBI within 24 hours, and they were delayed by 3 days, 3 to 15 days for different companies, and they were slapped a fine of 96 lakhs and they paid it. They could have challenged it in court, but they didn't, because going to courts with this particular kind of a case of a non-compliance means media attention, which means actually your brand value gets reduced. So when I said every outgoing communication is oriented around your brand value, is oriented about the goodwill that you create in the market, some kind of an example of that. And then communication with government agencies. There is licensing that happens. There is a legal knowledge that becomes important, because there are multiple acts, there are multiple rules that get applicable to your company, and under those rules there are multiple returns, there are multiple filings, there are multiple challans and everything, including your e-forms, your statutory registers and everything which you have to maintain, and different types of companies, different type of location. What laws become applicable to a bank will not be applicable to a pharmaceutical company. What becomes applicable to a pharmaceutical company will not be applicable to an engineering company, or something that gets applicable to IT companies altogether different. So we have to understand what gets applicable, what is the part of the law of the land that gets applicable to us. We have to create various checklists into it, and we have to make sure that we are following the law when we are conducting our business operations. Law is as simple as you have to pay your employees. Then there is a minimum wages act. What is the minimum amount you have to pay your employees? Then there is a payment of wages act, that you have to pay them. You have to pay them in what currency and on what date of the month, and that too in full payment or a part payment. So there are various laws that keep on governing it. There is a PF, there is an ESIC, there is a contract labor. So this is under only labor. There are finance, there is taxation, there is indirect taxation, there is direct taxation. and other things. So when you want to communicate with the public agencies, with the government specifically, you have to have the legal knowledge. That becomes a very important part. And then there is the part which is called as licensing. Now there are licensing can many a times be outsourced also. So that is actually, mitigating between your organization and the government if there are some non-compliances that are happening. So if you are if the company was slapped with a fine or a notice by some government authority, then you might want to get that fine reduced. You might want to challenge that particular thing. So instead of a court case, the first thing you would want to go is license. So this is pretty much about all this unit. Anything else, guys, you would want to have queries about, or you want to add into this? Any doubts, any queries, any additions? Okay then. So thank you for attending the class. We'll see you the next time.
Chaitanya, when you are going to share this PPT?
I'll share it with Mansi. She'll send it on the groups.
Okay, yeah.
Basically, what I've done is I've actually made only one single PPT, and I keep on adding, the newer chapters into it. So even if you have the first PPT, all the 3 are there, and when I'm sending this one, you will get all the 4.
Okay.
Yeah. So you don't have to, collect on different PPTs. You get the final PPT and all the units will be there.
Yeah. And good explanation. Thank you so much. I make quite understandable.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.